A snowy night brought them together, but sacred law sealed their fate forever. The night had arrived quietly, carrying with it the soft whisper of snow. The village lay under a thick white blanket that covered the roofs, the narrow paths, and the fields beyond. The trees bowed under the weight of the snow, and the lamps in front of the small houses flickered, casting a warm glow that barely reached the frost-laden streets. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting the cheeks and make breath visible in clouds. Ion, a young man from one of the village's farming families, walked slowly, carefully placing each step on the slippery ground. His boots crunched softly against the frozen snow, and the scarf wrapped tightly around his neck gave him some protection from the biting wind. He had spent the day helping neighbors clear snow from their roofs and paths. In a village where winters could be harsh and unforgiving, such tasks were more than a simple favor. They were a necessity for survival. Villagers respected each other for small acts of kindness, and Ion had grown up with a quiet understanding that helping others was not just good manners, but a part of life. Tonight, however, the task felt different. The snow fell heavier now, each flake adding to the quiet world around him, and he could feel the loneliness of the long winter pressing in. As he approached the village square, where the lamps cast long, uneven shadows over the icy ground, he noticed a figure moving awkwardly near the edge of the path. It was a girl, struggling to keep balance, her hands outstretched as she tried to avoid slipping on the ice. Her dark hair was pinned neatly under a shawl, but loose strands had escaped, brushing against her pale cheeks. The snow had already begun to coat her shoulders, and her small, delicate frame seemed almost swallowed by the thick white world around her. Without thinking, Ion quickened his pace. "Wait," he called softly, though the wind carried his voice unevenly. The girl froze for a moment, her eyes widening in surprise. One more step and she would have tumbled entirely, but Ion was there. He reached out instinctively, gripping her elbow with a firm yet gentle hold. "Careful," he said, his voice calm, steadying her as she regained balance. She looked up at him, startled, and their eyes met for the first time. There was an immediate recognition in that glance, though they had never met before. It was as if the world had paused, leaving only the two of them in the glow of the lamplit snow. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but the cold air caught in her throat, leaving her silent. Ion smiled lightly, not wanting to startle her, and continued to support her until they both reached a safer, less slippery part of the path. "Thank you," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible above the whispering wind. It was soft but carried a strength that surprised him. I didn't see the ice." "You're welcome," he replied simply, though his heart beat faster than usual. There was something in her gaze that was both curious and cautious, and he felt a strange pull, an unfamiliar feeling he could not name. For a moment they stood there, watching the snow fall around them. The flakes danced in the lamplight, swirling like tiny stars. Ion noticed the way her eyes followed the falling snow, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. He wanted to say something, to ask her name, to find a reason to speak longer, but the silence was comfortable, almost magical. The snow seemed to hush the rest of the world, and in that quiet the boundaries of their separate lives felt suspended. "I'm Ion," he finally said, feeling a need to break the silence. "And you?" She hesitated, glancing down at the snow-coated ground, then back up. "Sana," she said quietly. Her name had a gentle tone, like a soft melody in the still night. "Sana," he repeated, testing the sound on his tongue. It felt right somehow. They walked together slowly, carefully navigating the icy path. Though the snow had made the world cold and unforgiving, a small warmth had begun to grow between them, subtle but undeniable. Ion found himself glancing at her often, noticing the way her scarf moved when she adjusted it, the way her fingers were tucked inside her shawl for warmth, the slight shiver that ran through her despite the layers of clothing. As they reached the center of the village, they noticed how different the snow made everything look. The familiar houses and streets were transformed, softened by the white covering, unfamiliar yet strangely inviting. Ion and Sana spoke little, yet each word they exchanged carried weight. The conversation was simple, about the cold, the snow, the daily life of the village, but in each sentence they found a rhythm, a connection that neither expected. Ion offered to walk her to her home, and though she hesitated, she accepted. Her house was at the edge of the village, a modest home with smoke curling from the chimney. The walk was short, but every step felt significant. They spoke of trivial things, how heavy the snow had fallen, how the village animals coped, and which paths were safest to walk. Yet beneath these mundane words, there was an unspoken understanding, a shared experience that only they could feel. When they reached her doorstep, Sana paused. Her hands gripped the edge of the wooden door, and she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something Ion could feel in the flutter of his chest. "Thank you for helping me tonight," she said. It means a lot." "It was nothing," Ion replied, though he knew it was more than nothing. He wanted to say that he was glad to have met her, that the world seemed brighter for just sharing this snowy night with her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he smiled, a small, quiet smile that spoke more than words could. Sana returned the smile, a brief, shy gesture, and then stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Ion standing in the cold once more. He watched the soft light from the window, seeing her shadow move inside the warm home. For a long moment he stood there, listening to the quiet settling over the village. Then, reluctantly, he turned back toward his own house, the snow crunching beneath his boots once again. All the way home, his mind replayed the encounter. He remembered the curve of her smile, the sound of her voice, the warmth in her eyes despite the cold of the night. The snow, which had at first seemed only harsh and isolating, now felt like the setting of something extraordinary. Ion realized he had never felt this way before, never met someone who could make a fleeting encounter feel so significant. Sana, too, could not forget. The moment Ion had steadied her, the calm confidence in his presence, and the kindness in his eyes stayed with her long after she had returned to the warmth of her home. She found herself thinking of him as she performed the evening chores, her heart light despite the cold outside. There was a strange hope, a feeling that perhaps life could bring unexpected blessings even in the harshest winters. Yet beneath the warmth of this newfound connection, there was also a quiet awareness of the world around them. In a village like theirs, traditions were strong, and families were careful to follow the customs that had been in place for generations. Young people could not act purely on impulse, and social expectations were strict. Both Ion and Sana knew, even in that brief snowy encounter, that the world they lived in might not easily allow their bond to grow. Despite this, they both felt a pull that neither could ignore. The night had brought them together, two strangers sharing a moment that would remain etched in memory. Though the snow continued to fall heavily, blanketing the village in white silence, a spark had been lit, something fragile but enduring, a connection that promised to shape their lives in ways neither of them yet understood. As the night deepened, the village quieted further. Only the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the soft crunch of snow underfoot reminded anyone that the world continued outside their small homes. Ion reached his own doorstep, removing his boots and brushing the snow from his coat. He paused, thinking once more of Sana, and felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. This night was unlike any other he had experienced. It had been ordinary in its setting but extraordinary in its meaning. And in her home, Sana looked out the window at the snow-covered path, imagining Ion's figure walking back toward his house. She felt a warmth that defied the winter chill, a quiet certainty that their paths had crossed for a reason. The snowy night had brought them together, and though the future was uncertain, this meeting would remain in their hearts forever. Neither of them knew yet how the traditions and laws of their village might shape their lives. Neither knew the trials and challenges that awaited. But on this snowy night, amidst the silent beauty of their village, they had found a connection that could not be erased, a moment of human warmth and understanding in a cold, unyielding world. And so, as the snow continued to fall and cover every trace of their footprints in the village square, two hearts carried a quiet secret, a promise of something more, waiting for life to unfold in its own mysterious way. The days after that snowy night passed quietly, yet they carried a new weight for both Ion and Sana. Life in the village moved slowly, measured by the rhythm of chores, the calls of animals and the changing weather, but something had shifted in their hearts. Each morning, Ion found himself scanning the paths he walked, wondering if he might see her again. Every task he completed, from tending the animals to helping with the fields, felt lighter because of the thought of her. He would remember the curve of her smile, the way her scarf had fallen slightly over her shoulder, and the quiet strength in her eyes. Sana, too, felt the echo of that night in every moment. Even the mundane routines of fetching water or preparing meals seemed brighter when she thought of Ion. She felt an unfamiliar warmth whenever she remembered how steady his hands had been, how calm his voice, how naturally kind he had appeared. And yet, she also felt caution. The village was small and families watched carefully, especially when it came to young men and women. Tradition was a guide for life here, and her own family was particularly strict. Love, if it existed outside arranged paths, was whispered about but rarely acted upon. Still, life had a way of bringing them together. A few days after the first meeting, their paths crossed near the village well. The day was clear, the snow softened into small piles along the edges of the road. Ion was drawing water for his family, while Sana had come to collect water for her household. Their eyes met across the well, and a small, shy smile passed between them. "Hello, Sana," Ion said, his voice low but full of warmth. "Hello, Ion," she replied, her cheeks tinged with pink from the cold. They spoke briefly at first, exchanging small words about the weather and the tasks at hand. But each meeting grew longer and each conversation deeper. They began to share simple stories from their childhoods, tales of winter games in the snow, the animals they had cared for, and the moments of joy and struggle they remembered. With each passing day, their bond strengthened. They laughed more freely together, a sound that seemed foreign in the quiet village but comforting to their ears. One afternoon, they found themselves walking together to deliver firewood to an elderly neighbor. The snow crunched beneath their feet as they carried the wood, and the cold air carried their laughter across the fields. Ion noticed how Sana's hands, though gloved, trembled slightly as she adjusted the heavy bundle. Without a word, he reached out, steadying her hands and carrying part of the wood for her. Her eyes met his in gratitude, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. The village was beginning to notice. Whispers traveled quickly in small communities, and soon neighbors would glance at them with curiosity or concern. Yet despite the attention, Ion and Sana continued to meet quietly, sharing moments that were both ordinary and extraordinary. They helped elderly villagers with chores, exchanged small gifts of food, and even shared simple games with children who played in the snow. Each interaction was innocent, but the feelings that grew between them were undeniable. It was during one of these secret moments that their friendship began to deepen into something more. They had climbed to a small hill outside the village, where the snow was untouched, and the village below looked like a miniature world blanketed in white. They walked slowly, careful not to slip, and spoke of their dreams. Sana admitted that she wished to travel beyond the mountains someday, to see the world beyond the village. Ion confessed that he often imagined a life where he could help people in ways that went beyond the fields and barns of his family. Their confessions were honest, and in that honesty, they found trust. They understood each other in ways that others in the village could not. The snow fell softly around them, muffling the sounds of the village below. The cold air bit at their faces, but it could not touch the warmth growing between them. Ion reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from Sana's face, and she did not pull away. For the first time, they felt safe in each other's presence, as if the world outside the hill had vanished. Despite the joy they found in each other, a shadow of worry lingered. Sana knew her family had plans for her future that she could not ignore. Her parents had spoken of marriage arrangements, the kind that were made to ensure family honor and alliances, not personal choice. Ion was aware of his own limitations as a young man of a farming family, and he knew the village's expectations could never be easily ignored. They both felt the tension between what their hearts wanted and what their lives demanded. Yet, the pull between them could not be denied. They found ways to meet without drawing attention, early mornings when the village was still asleep, or during chores that allowed them to pass each other unnoticed. They exchanged small tokens of affection, a hand-carved wooden charm, a bundle of dried flowers, or a simple note left where only the other could find it. Each gift, small though it was, carried the weight of their growing connection. One evening, after a long day of chores, they found themselves again on the hill. The snow had turned to a soft powder, and the sky glowed with the colors of sunset, reflecting pink and orange on the snow-covered land. They stood side by side, gazing at the village below. "I wish time could stay like this," Sana whispered, her voice barely audible. "Me too," Ion replied, feeling the same longing in his chest. "I don't want to think about what might come tomorrow." They stood in silence for a while, simply enjoying the presence of each other. It was a peaceful moment, one of many that they would treasure in memory. Ion wanted to take her hand, to promise that he would protect her in every way he could, but he paused. Even in the quiet, they both knew that their actions had limits, and that the world they lived in was not entirely theirs to command. Despite the growing closeness, the reality of the village's traditions began to press harder. Neighbors started noticing that they spent more time together than was usual for young villagers. Quiet whispers and cautious glances followed them, subtle but clear signs that people were paying attention. They realized that while their connection was genuine, it existed in a world that could not fully accept it. This awareness made their moments together even more precious. Every shared glance, every word spoken in secret became a treasure. The snowy paths, the quiet hills, and the small acts of kindness were no longer just part of daily life. They were symbols of a bond that defied the ordinary rules of the village. One particularly cold afternoon, Ion and Sana found themselves trapped in a sudden snowfall while returning from the well. The wind whipped around them, and the snow fell thickly, covering their footprints almost immediately. They took shelter under the branches of a large pine tree, its heavy boughs shielding them from the worst of the storm. They huddled together for warmth, and for a long time neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the quiet understanding of two hearts connected by something neither could name. Finally, Sana spoke, her voice soft. "I am glad I met you, Ion. Even if the world does not allow us to be together, I am glad this happened." Ion looked at her, his breath visible in the cold air. "I feel the same. I don't know what will happen, but I know this. These moments, this time with you, I will carry it always." The snowstorm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the village once more covered in a pristine layer of white. Ion and Sana returned to their separate homes, each carrying the warmth of the other's presence, even as the cold of the winter night lingered around them. The days that followed were filled with similar meetings, each one brief but meaningful. They continued to share stories, dreams, and laughter, finding comfort in each other's company. Yet the weight of the village's expectations was never far away. Every stolen moment reminded them that their bond existed in a fragile space between desire and duty. Even as they navigated the challenges of secrecy, their connection grew stronger. They began to understand each other in ways that went beyond words. Ion learned the small habits that made Sana laugh, the way she looked at the snow when she was thinking, the gentleness with which she treated animals and children alike. Sana discovered Ion's quiet determination, his kindness to others, and the way his presence could make the harsh world of winter feel warm. By the time the first signs of spring began to appear, with snow melting in patches and the smell of damp earth rising from the fields, Ion and Sana had formed a bond that neither could deny. It was not just friendship, it was a deep, tender connection built on trust, shared experience, and an understanding of each other's hearts. And yet, even as the seasons changed, a quiet tension remained. The villagers were watching, the families were expecting, and the traditions of the community loomed like a shadow over their happiness. They knew that the time would come when the world outside their secret meetings would intrude, and that moment would test the strength of their bond in ways they could not yet imagine. But for now, they walked together in the snow, laughed in the fields, and shared stories under the fading winter sun. They had found something precious in each other, a light in the cold world that surrounded them. And though the path ahead was uncertain, they carried the hope that their hearts had chosen each other in a way that nothing, not even tradition or law, could entirely erase. The days of early spring brought with them a gentle warmth and the first whispers of life after a long winter. But for Ion and Sana, the beauty of the season could not erase the tension that had begun to grow around them. The village, quiet and small as it was, had begun to notice the closeness between the two young people. Whispers traveled like the wind across the snow-covered paths and melting fields. Neighbors exchanged cautious glances when Ion and Sana walked together, offering help to the elderly or carrying firewood, their actions innocent but interpreted in the careful eyes of the villagers. Ion noticed the changes first. When he passed through the market square, he felt the weight of gazes lingering on him. He saw mothers pulling their children close, men lowering their voices as they spoke, and women whispering behind their hands. At first, he tried to ignore it, telling himself that the world would calm down, that people would see they were simply helping each other, nothing more. But the whispers grew louder, and the cautious glances became pointed looks. The reality of the village's watchful eyes began to press down on him. Sana felt it too. She noticed the change in the way her friends spoke to her, the way her mother's eyes lingered with questions she did not dare ask aloud. Her father began to speak more firmly about tradition, reminding her that the family's honor depended on careful decisions about whom she could trust and whom she could allow close. She understood what was being said without words. Her growing bond with Ion was no longer unnoticed. It was no longer private. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Ion was summoned to the village elder's house. The walk there was heavy on his mind. He had helped the elder's family with chores for years, and he knew respect was important, but he also feared what he might hear. The elder, a stern man with silver hair and deep-set eyes, spoke directly and without delay. "You have been seen spending too much time with Sana," the elder said, his voice calm but firm. "Our village has rules. Sacred laws guide how families maintain honor and unity. These rules are not suggestions, they are absolute. You must end this association immediately or face consequences." Ion's heart sank. He had known, deep down, that the traditions of the village were strict, but hearing it directly left him feeling hollow. I understand," he said carefully, "but I care for her. She is not doing anything wrong, I promise." The elder shook his head slowly. "It is not about wrongdoing, Ion. It is about boundaries, about law and custom. The sacred law exists to protect families, to guide the community. You cannot choose to ignore it, no matter how you feel." Ion left the elder's house with a heavy heart. The words echoed in his mind as he walked back through the quiet streets, the first stars appearing in the sky above. He knew that the bond he and Sana shared was precious, but now it existed in a fragile space, constrained by rules older than anyone living. He thought of her smile, her warmth, the way she made even the harshest days feel brighter, and a sense of despair settled over him. How could something so beautiful be forbidden? When he returned home, he found Sana waiting near the village well, her face pale, her eyes searching for his. She had heard the whispers too, had seen the glances, had felt the weight of tradition pressing down. "Ayan," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "they are watching, they know." "I know," he replied, taking her hands in his. "I just came from the elder." He spoke clearly. "The law, it does not allow us to be together." Sana's eyes filled with tears, but she held his hands tightly. "I don't care about the law," she whispered. "I care about you." But her voice broke and she looked away. "But my family, they have their rules. I cannot disobey them without bringing shame." The snow that had once brought them together now seemed cold and cruel. They stood there silently, holding onto each other in a moment of quiet desperation. The world that had felt so soft and magical during their secret meetings now felt rigid and unyielding. Sacred law, a principle they had respected but never fully understood, had become a wall between their hearts. In the days that followed, Ayan and Sana tried to cling to their bond in small, careful ways. They exchanged letters hidden beneath loose stones by the river, shared brief smiles across crowded streets, and helped each other with chores in moments when others were not watching. Each gesture, though minor, carried the weight of their love and longing. Yet the pressure grew. Families began speaking in hushed tones about what would happen if they were caught together again. Sana's parents reminded her repeatedly that her future was already planned, that breaking sacred law could lead to social exile, damage to the family's honor, and a lifetime of regret. Ayan's own family, though kind and understanding, warned him that continuing to pursue a forbidden relationship could bring shame and hardship to all involved. One night, during a particularly heavy snowfall, they found themselves once more under the large pine tree outside the village, the same place where they had shared their first honest confessions of dreams and hopes. The wind howled, carrying snowflakes in blinding swirls, but they clung together, trying to find warmth in each other's presence. "I don't want to leave you," Sana said softly, tears mixing with snow on her cheeks. I want to be with you, Ayan." "But the law, it is stronger than us." Ayan held her close, his heart aching. "I know, I wish we could change it. I wish we could be free. But the law, it is real and it cannot be broken without pain." They stayed there for a long time, neither speaking, listening only to the wind and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. Every moment together felt like both a blessing and a curse, a fleeting joy overshadowed by the certainty of an impossible future. Finally, they made a silent agreement. They would no longer meet openly, could no longer risk the consequences that the sacred law demanded. Their letters, their small exchanges, even their brief smiles across paths had to end, at least for now. It was the only way to protect themselves, to respect their families, and to honor the traditions that governed their lives. The final meeting came on another snowy evening, not unlike the first night they had met. They found themselves at the edge of the village, where the snow had begun to fall in soft flakes, covering the ground like a delicate blanket. They held each other's hands, neither wanting to let go, knowing that the moment would be their last for an uncertain time. "I will remember you always," Ayan said, his voice breaking. "No matter what happens, no one can take this away from us." Sana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And I will remember you, always. Even if the world tells us we cannot be together, my heart is yours." They embraced one final time, holding onto each other as if the world outside could not touch them. When they finally pulled apart, it was with a quiet, mutual understanding that their lives would now move in separate directions, guided by the laws and expectations they could not defy. As Ion walked back to his home, he felt the ache of loss but also the enduring warmth of what they had shared. The snow continued to fall, covering the village in silence, erasing footprints and memories in its soft white glow. But in his heart, the memory of Sana's smile, the touch of her hand, and the sound of her voice remained vivid, unyielding. Sana, alone in her room, looked out at the snowy village, her heart heavy yet resolute. She had accepted her duty, her family's expectations, and the sacred law, but a part of her remained tethered to Ion. She knew that no matter where life took her, the memory of their time together, the connection they had forged against the cold world, would remain a constant, quiet presence in her life. And so, the sacred law had sealed their fate. Their bond, deep and genuine, existed now only in memory, in fleeting thoughts, and in moments that could never be repeated openly. The love that had grown so quickly, nurtured in snow and quiet kindness, was now restrained by duty, tradition, and unyielding rules. Yet, despite the heartbreak, neither Ion nor Sana could deny the truth that had taken root in their hearts, that their lives had been changed forever by a meeting on a snowy night, a bond that had blossomed despite the boundaries imposed by the world around them. The village, unaware of the depth of their connection, continued to move on. Life returned to its measured rhythm, with chores, seasons, and duties shaping every day. And yet, every snowfall brought a subtle reminder of what had once been, a night that had brought two hearts together, a bond that had touched them both profoundly, and a sacred law that had kept them apart. Even as spring turned to summer, the memory of the snow remained vivid for both of them. They would carry it quietly in their hearts, a secret warmth amidst the pressures of duty, expectation, and tradition. And though they could not be together, the love they had shared, small and fragile as it seemed against the weight of the world, would remain eternal, a quiet testament to the power of connection, the resilience of memory, and the bittersweet beauty of a love that could never fully bloom. Time moved on as it always does, gentle but unyielding, carrying the village from the cold of winter into the warmth of spring, and then the fullness of summer. For most people, life seemed to settle into the usual rhythms of work, family, and village traditions. But for Ion and Sana, the memory of that snowy night and the bond they had shared remained alive, quietly shaping their hearts even as they walked separate paths. Ion returned fully to his family's farm work, tending the fields and animals with careful attention. Each morning, as he worked under the sun, the memory of Sana lingered in the quiet moments. The way she had smiled, the sound of her laughter, the gentle trust in her eyes. He carried that memory like a secret warmth in his chest, something that could not be stolen from him, even if the world had forced them apart. Though he spoke with other villagers and fulfilled his daily responsibilities, there was a space in his heart that belonged only to her. Sana, too, lived her life carefully, honoring her family's wishes and the sacred laws that guided them. She moved through her days quietly, assisting her mother with household work, caring for younger siblings, and participating in village events. On the surface, her life appeared normal, yet beneath that surface, she carried the same gentle ache of longing for Ion. She remembered the small moments they had shared, the walk to deliver firewood, the hill where they had spoken of dreams, the snowy evening when they had held each other and promised to remember. Those memories gave her comfort, even as they reminded her of the life she could not have. Despite the passage of time, their connection remained. Sometimes, from a distance, they would catch a glimpse of each other in the village square or near the well. Even a fleeting glance would cause their hearts to flutter, a silent acknowledgement that the bond they shared had not faded. Words were unnecessary. Their eyes spoke volumes. Each meeting, though brief and cautious, strengthened the invisible thread that tied them together, a thread woven from shared trust, care, and understanding. As seasons changed, the village prepared for festivals, planting, and harvests. Life was full of activity, Yet Ayan and Sana found solace in the quiet moments away from the crowd. Ayan would rise early, walking along the paths leading to the fields, remembering how Sana had once walked beside him, and imagining her soft laughter blending with the morning air. Sana would find herself pausing near familiar spots, the well, the pine tree outside the village, imagining Ayan's presence and feeling the warmth of that shared time. There were moments when longing became almost unbearable. Ayan would sometimes stop his work, staring at the horizon, thinking about how different life might have been if the sacred law had not dictated the choices of their families. Sana, in similar solitude, would feel the weight of duty pressing on her shoulders, yet her heart would drift to the memory of him, finding quiet strength in the thought that love could exist, even if it could not be expressed openly. Despite the rules that kept them apart, their bond left subtle traces in their daily lives. Ayan, inspired by the quiet kindness he had experienced with Sana, treated others with more patience and care. He noticed small needs that others had overlooked, offered help without expecting thanks, and carried a gentleness in his words and actions that villagers had begun to respect. Sana, too, carried the lessons of their time together in her heart. She treated her family and neighbors with thoughtfulness and compassion, noticing the needs of others, helping quietly and smiling gently even when burdened by duty. Years passed, and the village changed with them. Young children grew, the old paths were worn smooth by daily use, and the hills and forests surrounding the village held the seasons, repeated cycles. Ayan and Sana matured, carrying their memories quietly as part of their lives. Their dreams had adapted to the reality of their circumstances, but the core of what they had shared remained untouchable. In their hearts, they had each other, even if life circumstances demanded that they appear apart. One day during a light snowfall in early winter, the village seemed to pause. Ayan, walking through the square to deliver supplies, noticed a figure across the way. His heart skipped a beat. It was Sana. She was standing near the well, her shawl wrapped tightly against the cold, her posture straight and poised. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, years seemed to collapse into the memory of their first snowy night together. Neither spoke aloud. Words were unnecessary. The glance alone carried the weight of years, the acknowledgement of what had been shared, and the quiet understanding that, though they were apart, their connection remained unbroken. The villagers around them continued their tasks, unaware of the silent conversation taking place. Ayan raised a hand slightly, a small, respectful greeting, and Sana returned it with a gentle nod. That was all they could allow, yet it was enough. Life continued, as it always does. Ayan devoted himself to his family's land, building a reputation as a hardworking, kind, and respected young man. Sana, guided by her family's wishes, accepted the responsibilities and expectations placed upon her, becoming a careful, thoughtful, and valued member of the community. Both carried the memory of their love in quiet pockets of their hearts, letting it influence their choices without overtly challenging the world around them. Though they could not openly share their feelings, the bond they had formed guided them in subtle ways. Ayan found joy in helping others, inspired by the kindness he had felt with Sana. Sana approached her family and neighbors with gentleness, patience, and care, shaped by the deep understanding of what it meant to truly care for someone else. Their love, though restrained, became a quiet force that shaped their characters, making them better versions of themselves. Even as decades passed, they occasionally crossed paths in the village. A fleeting glance, a brief smile, a nod across the square. These small moments reminded them of the bond that had begun on that snowy night. Life had not allowed them to be together fully, but it had not erased the love and connection that had blossomed between them. It remained, quietly but powerfully, a part of who they were. In the evenings, when the village was quiet and the wind carried the scent of snow and wood smoke, Ayan would sometimes find himself looking toward the hills, imagining the moments he had shared with Sana. Sana, too, would pause near familiar spots, feeling the warmth of those memories despite the cold world around her. The sacred law had kept them apart, but it had not diminished the impact of their bond. The village, ever respectful of tradition and law, continued its cycles of life, harvest, and celebration. Families prospered, children grew, and the rhythms of work and duty continued. And yet, the memory of two young hearts that had once found each other against the odds remained, quietly influencing the lives of those involved. Ayan and Sana had learned that love did not always need to be declared openly to be real. It could exist in memories, in silent glances, and in the quiet spaces of the heart. Years later, when another snowfall blanketed the village, Ayan walked along the paths he had known so well. The snow reminded him of that first night, of the moment he had met Sana. As he approached the hill outside the village, he noticed a figure standing at the edge, looking toward the distant fields. His breath caught. It was Sana, older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still carrying the gentle warmth he remembered. They did not speak. Words were unnecessary. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a shared understanding that life had taken them on different paths, yet their connection had never been lost. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the snowfall, feeling the warmth of memory and the quiet joy of recognition. It was a bittersweet moment, full of longing, gratitude, and acceptance. As the snow continued to fall, they finally turned and walked back to their separate homes, each carrying the reassurance that the bond they shared had endured. Life would continue, shaped by duty, tradition, and circumstance, but the memory of their love would remain eternal. Ayan and Sana had been brought together by a snowy night, and though sacred law had kept them apart, it had not taken away the beauty of what they had shared. In the years that followed, the story of Ayan and Sana became part of the quiet memory of the village. Elders would sometimes recall a young man and woman who had shared secret smiles, who had helped others in the snow, and whose bond had been unbreakable even when life demanded separation. Their tale was never spoken loudly, for it respected the law and the traditions of the village, but those who remembered knew that love, even when restrained, could endure and inspire quietly. Ayan and Sana lived full lives within the boundaries their families and society had set. They married according to their respective families' wishes, built homes, raised children, and cared for the next generation. Yet in the quiet moments, when work was done and the village lay calm under a blanket of snow, they remembered. They remembered the first meeting, the stolen walks, the hill where dreams had been shared, and the snowy night that had brought them together. That memory, that bond, remained untouched by time, an eternal testament to love that was true even if forbidden. And so, though life had kept them apart, Ayan and Sana carried within them the knowledge that love had come to them once, beautiful and real, and that memory would never fade. The snowy night had brought them together, sacred law had kept them apart, but the connection of their hearts endured forever, quiet, strong, and unforgettable.